South Mumbai zonal rounds of the Mind Wars Mumbai Debate Championship 2021. Today we're going to watch the top 8 students in South Mumbai contest it out to see who makes it to the city grand final. We hope you really enjoy these upcoming rounds because we know they're going to set us on fire. The motion before the floor today is the government should ban zoos and instead transfer animals out to wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, and bioreserves. Speaking in favor of the topic in our very first South Mumbai quarterfinal is Anisha Bhatia from Podar International School. Speaking on opposition, also from Podar International School, we have Divyansha Agarwal.
Good morning, everyone. Let's talk about the negative impact of holding animals captive, force mating them, and keeping them in tiny enclosed spaces. To begin with, zoos lack open areas and natural habitats. This can be extremely detrimental for their health. Moving on, I would like to talk about a statement issued by PETA on the negative impact of zoos on animals' well-being. They said that zoos can cause neurotic behavior for animals, such as swaying and biting the bars of cages. This further proves that keeping animals in zoos is unfair and unjust. Imagine being caged for the rest of your life, unable to explore, forced to be a site of photography for others' enjoyment. How would you feel stuck behind bars with no choice regarding your own lives, dependent on a couple of other people to feed you and just hope that they don't hurt you? It's a frightening experience. Our enjoyment should never come at the expense of another animal. If you're a researcher, a child, teach your children that bioreserves are the way to go. They can observe animals in their natural habitats. Animals' homes are not 3 walls and a couple of bars or a glass wall. It's a forest, it's space, it's snow. Let animals live like that.
When I was 5, I visited the Singapore Zoo. I had always been fascinated by wildlife. The visit to the zoo was not only an extremely fun visit, it was also educational. There, the animals were all allocated huge areas where their natural habitat had been replicated. The enclosures were safe and fun for the animals. For every type of animal, various kinds of entertainment were provided. I could clearly see that they genuinely cared about the animals in the same way many zoos around the world do. Hence, today, I'm here to present my case that the government should not ban zoos. My first argument is that sanctuaries are unsafe for both animals and humans. My next argument is that zoos instill empathy for their animals and humans. It is common knowledge that animals are known for their affinity to protect their own. This is dangerous for visitors who are taken in for a tour or a safari, as they could get attacked, which would lead to great harm for the animals and the humans. Due to the constant loss of animals' habitat, there is a high chance that they would start venturing out into cities, which would increase the chance of human-animal conflict. Furthermore, the decline in wildlife population is a clear sign how uneducated and uninformed people are about animals and the way they contribute to our ecosystem. I think that these arguments make it distinct why zoos are more suitable for housing wildlife as compared to sanctuaries. I propose that the government bans sanctuaries instead of banning zoos and provides all sanctuaries with a period to convert their area into a zoo. Thank you.
You listed a number of problems with zoos, such as the ill treatment of animals and the lack of space available for them. Why do you prefer banning them rather than having regulations?
In response to your question, I think asking for zoos to be regulated still means that we need more personnel dedicated to monitoring zoos. Is that possible for our government to allocate those many funds for the same? The second question would be, we can treat them better. And I would also like to add that it's difficult to monitor zoos because, like many other things, they can pretend to be all okay. But the issue with a lot of these things is often animals are drugged in their cages. How is someone supposed to monitor that? So that's my response to your question.
Divyansha, I've got a question for you. So you seem to feel very strongly about the fact that sanctuaries could be dangerous for animals as well, and they could be unsafe. Would your position then be that there should be no animals in the wild and that all animals should only be in zoos?
Okay. I think that there is a certain number of animals that are held outside of wild and are held in protection, irrespective of whether they are in zoos or sanctuaries. So I believe that instead of placing them in sanctuaries, the same amount of animals should be in zoos. I do not believe that all the animals, but just just not in sanctuaries at all, only in zoos and in the wild.
Of course, unfortunately, only one person can go through to the semi-final. And for this round, that is Anisha from Side Proposition. Congratulations.
Okay, so before we jump into the round, I know I've already done Dhruva and my introductions, but I'm going to take a quick moment and also introduce the new member we've got on the jury panel. Our guest for today is Utkarsh Amitabh, who is the CEO of Network Capital, one of India's largest mentorship communities with a growing presence worldwide. The writer is a writer at Harvard Business Review and also the author of The Seductive Illusion of Hard Work, which is an Amazon #1 bestseller. For our second quarterfinal, the motion before the floor reads, the government should replace all standardized exams like quarterlies, half-yearlies, board exams in schools with projects, take-home assignments, etc. Speaking in favor, from Jasubin ML School, we have Anuja Randeri. And speaking on opposition from Gopi Birla Memorial, we have Rhythm Porwa.
If we look at the advancements humans have made in society, we see people like Darwin, who didn't follow what they were taught, but instead thought beyond it. We see people like Mahatma Gandhi, who didn't use the textbook strategies, but instead thought of new strategies to surprise other people. We are no longer in the industrial age, and what we need are not people who are good at following instructions, but people who are good at innovating. And yet we educate people to do the exact opposite. At the crux of this issue is standardized assessment. When we take standardized assessment, we take fixed questions with fixed answers, even though those answers could have multiple possible approaches and could have multiple possible answers too. This is not only unnecessary within schools, but there are also better options like projects, which if we use to replace these, we will be able to educate children better. So this entire process of education becomes about test taking, and children often just rote learn the subject, the material, to appear well in tests because that's what they think they need for later in life. This may be good for ranking and for testing facts. So yes, it can be used as entrance exams for colleges, as external assessments. But within schools, they are absolutely unnecessary because if a child gets into a school, it's because they belong there. Within schools, children need to learn how to think, how to create. And so we should encourage them to do projects. We have to stop asking children to tell us what we think about topics and instead encourage them to tell us what they think about topics. Projects are infinitely better than standardized tests in this aspect, and thus they should unquestionably replace standardized tests in schools. Thank you.
I strongly oppose that projects and take-home assignments should be imposed in schools. Standardized exams need preparation beforehand. The school atmosphere helps our eyes to see the real world, while take-home assignments make cheating very easy. At home, we have the help of family and Google. But I would like to remind you that Google is just a search engine that provides both right and wrong information. There is a different feeling of giving the exam in a school. With many students, every student must go through this feeling, and I would like to conclude that governments should not impose projects and take-home assignments. Thank you.
Hi, Anuja. Thank you for that speech. Those were some well-examined arguments. My question to you is that the kinds of projects and take-home tests that you described sound like they require access to libraries, resource material, the guidance from parents and support systems, the internet, all of which are often lacking. Don't you think that a focus on take-home tests and projects creates an unfair barrier to students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds?
So even students from lower socio-economic backgrounds, if they're going to school, it means they have a teacher, right? So although they don't have access to libraries, they have access to discussion with their teacher and with their classmates, and this will enable them to think more, right? Even if they don't have access to all the libraries in the world, there are often school libraries, right? Those themselves pack a lot of information. So even if they're going to things like government schools, as long as they have a good teacher, as long as they're willing to think and put in effort, even without access to the internet, they can come up with some good stuff.
Rhythm, I have a question for you, which is, why do you think that exams that make you compete and often compete unhealthily are better than the kind of work that makes you collaborate and put ideas together and come up with something better?
As I said, I feel students should be self-independent. Like in group projects, it sometimes happens that one person completes all the work and the others are just helping very little. Also, I'm not denying group discussions. Standardized exams will be the correct way to know if a student has knowledge. Thank you.
What evidence would you need to see in the world for you to go on her side and for her to go on yours?
I think the evidence I would need to see is that children actually learn things from exams, because when I look at my classmates myself, I see that a lot of them are into things like tuitions. And when you ask them, most people struggle mainly, if you ask them, they'll say, I struggle with the application-based questions in science. If we come up with a system where standardized testing can reduce this whole process of ranking and of like tuitions and money making for sending children into certain colleges just for the name of it, and can instead emphasize on educating children, making them learn things so that they can innovate, so that they can go do things later in life beyond money, have a passion in their subject, then I think I'd accept standardized testing.
The thing that would change me to her side will be that children should be ranked, but they should be ranked on their originality and not something they've copied from somewhere. So if a student has an original idea which no one has ever thought before, that can be very helpful for it, and that projects will be better.
Unfortunately, we do have to pick one, and the person who's going to be winning is Anuja.
For quarterfinal 3, the motion before the floor reads as follows. The Electoral Commission should give politicians the choice to demarcate up to 30% of their promises on their manifesto as binding, such that if these promises aren't fulfilled by the end of the politician's term, that politician cannot run for re-election in the future. To speak in favor of this topic, may I please request Aryan Shivdasani from Jasubain ML School to take the stage? And to speak on opposition, may I request Ariha Shah from Gopi Birla Memorial School to take the stage?
When one with honeyed words but evil mind persuades the mob, great wars befall the state, Euripides once said. I'm chuckling looking at the fact that this statement carries validity. In today's world, politicians are the pillars of democracy who are tasked with the responsibility of improving society. The sad reality is that we often put politicians in power who befool us with their silver tongue and portray their idea of a perfect society and make promises with great gusto. I'm going to support the following using 3 arguments. My first argument is the fact that politicians will be able to reform society in a symbiotic manner. Many politicians from Asia make promises to eradicate stereotypes, but once elected, barely any effort to no effort is put into this. My second argument is based on the fact that over time, the economic conditions of places across the globe might improve. Many politicians make promises to end poverty, which are vague and not well defined. My third argument is the fact that many politicians promise to build roads and bridges to connect rural to urban areas, empowerment of rural areas, but once into power, nothing happens. Very few promises are fulfilled there. Therefore, I proudly propose the fact that this should take place.
Okay, so India is a democratic country. The basic principle of democracy states that it is of the people, for the people, and by the people. Then who is the Electoral Commission who makes the choice that politicians cannot stand for re-elections? Argument 1. The power of not allowing politicians to run for re-elections should not be in the hands of the Electoral Commission, but that of the people. There is universal adult franchise in India that states any citizen who is an adult can vote in elections and therefore has a power in choosing their representatives, which in short is the government. The government can have programs of awareness, like they can tell the people what was promised on the manifesto at the start of the term and what has been fulfilled by the politician by the end of it. This will give the people a clear picture on who they have to choose again or not. They can be sure if the politician was worthy of being choosing again. My second argument is that the Electoral Commission states that 30% of the promises have to be fulfilled. Therefore, it is giving us a clear cutoff for the eligibility of politicians for re-election. So like the politicians would complete 30% of the promises and would be assured that they can be re-elected again. This would result in most of the people's problems wouldn't be fulfilled only. Therefore, the Electoral Commission should allow politicians to stand for re-elections and not have a cutoff of 30% of the promises fulfilling. Thank you.
I have a question for you, which is sometimes, even if a politician fulfills no promises, a voter might want to elect them back in because there are other reasons the voter thinks this politician should be in power. Why is that not a choice that I should have the right to make?
So I believe that while you may have the entire choice, we also need to look at the fact that what is the main aim of democracy? It is the aim to improve the conditions of the people. It is for the people.
So, Ariha, my question to you would be that today, as much as I understand, politicians don't seem to be doing anything. So, 0 to 30% seems like progress, don't you think? So, if politicians do end up committing or doing 30% of what they promised, that seems to be better off than their current level of performance. Why do you dislike this?
Like I said before, like many a times situations take place which disallow politicians to complete their promises. But if we keep a cutoff of 30% there, then it's going to be unjust for many a times. Because politicians will only think that 30% is done, my work is done, and I can re-elect. But when we have no cutoff, the people can choose like whether you see progress, you can put them in power again. You don't see progress, choose somebody else.
The speaker moving through to the semi-finals is the speaker against the motion, Ariha. Congratulations and commiserations to the proposition speaker.
For our fourth and final quarterfinal today, non-violent offenders who have committed first-time crimes should not be sentenced to prison and should instead be required to pay restitution or perform community service based on their income level. Speaking in favor of the motion, we have Kamya Karthikeyan from Navy Children's School. Speaking against, we have Sanvi Rawat from Podar International School.
As proposition, I strongly support this motion because it is the law of natural justice, especially when it comes to non-violent offences. Firstly, let's look into the issues in the current system. Prisons are supposed to be corrective centers where people with penal outlooks are isolated from the general public so as to ensure public safety. So, sending these non-violent offenders to such corrective centers is against the very purpose of creation of jails. Such an act could have two outcomes on the offenders. First, they could get influenced by established criminals and get involved in serious crimes. Or second, if they are innocent and happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, life in prison could adversely affect their mental and physical well-being. Either ways, the aim of corrective action may be completely lost. Firstly, innocent people who might have been lured or blackmailed into working for criminals or committed an offense out of sheer ignorance will get a chance at redemption and regain a normal life. Second, the problems of jails being overcrowded because of a huge inflow of prisoners can be avoided as only serious criminals will be sent to prison. In conclusion, this model provides us with a win-win situation where necessary deterrence can be put into place while meeting the aims of a prison for lesser non-violent offences committed by people either due to compulsion or by ignorance. Hence, I hope that the House will be in favour of my motion.
the underlying reasons behind someone resorting to crime is complex, and the system cannot be expected to sort through all of them to accordingly condemn the criminal. Further, not every country, especially underdeveloped countries, have the resources to support advanced technology. In a world where the rich and wealthy have managed to evade paying taxes, it seems extremely unlikely that they would force themselves to suffer through fines and sentences. It's not unknown that they can easily get away with their pleasureful crimes through, ironically, bribery and other forms of criminal corruption. Firstly, note that people are not inherently conditioned to commit crimes. It would have to be a forceful drive persuading them to resort to a situation where they know they can easily be caught and punished. To further their cause, the government should encourage and incentivize private companies to fall into the fray of setting up programs and allowing criminals to work while being offered job training, providing them with the financial stability to help their families while being in prison, and finding it easier to merge back into society with fresh hope to do better. The second argument covers the issues of the stigma of imprisonment prisoners carry once back in society. Being labeled as inferior to others makes it difficult for them to find jobs, someone who will allow them a place to rent, or include them in their social structure. In conclusion, when an individual is given the opportunity to regret and repair their errors, more often than not, they will grasp for that opportunity, impartially allowing non-violent first-time criminals to be calibrated back into the living within a society will not only improve their lives, but also the country's employment rate and reduce the crime rate. Any nation's wholesome well-being and its HDI index is dependent on the aforementioned factors. Thank you.
Kamya, I have a question for you. When a politician engages in corruption, which is technically non-violent, and that results in a poor contractor building a bridge or a building that collapses, and people lose their lives and livelihoods, why is that any less violent than what a violent criminal does? And would you not put the politician in prison?
In this case, the politician would have surely committed a non-violent crime, though serious, and once appealed in court, the court should take a rightful verdict for this. The punishment for a violent act should be given to the contractor who built the bridge, because it was because of him accepting a bribe from a particular politician that the bridge was not made how it is supposed to be.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So tell me, I'm the CEO of Network Capital, why I should go with your proposition. Why should what's my incentive to hire a person with, say, a criminal record?
I believe that especially first-time non-violent criminals should deserve a second chance. With the debate that I argued for, prisons would give them an opportunity to work hard. People who, as I mentioned, people who resort to non-violent crimes are usually forced to do this because they don't have any other opportunity than to resort to something like that. So you, as a CEO, you should give them a chance, because if they've come up to you, if they're asking for a job, that means they truly want to try and improve their lives.
We've arrived at our judgment, and it's as follows. The speaker who, in a very, very close decision, will be moving on to the semifinals. The speaker in favor of the motion, Kamya. Congratulations.